Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, monu miliwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so wicked happy that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Susan Combs. She is here to celebrate Pancakes for Roger. Before we invite Susan into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Peril, a great middle grade novel by Margaret Pollock. Get ready for a breathtaking adventure in Polar Peril. This captivating story introduces us to 12-year-old Nikki and her cousin, Charlie Chum. Nikki and Charlie Chum attend the Mohawk Strawberry Festival. While they're there, a seer gives Nikki a magical carved polar bear named Follow Me. Follow Me guides her as she learns how to talk with animals and fly. Follow Me tells Nikki that the Creator has an assignment just for her, to fly to the Arctic and save the polar bears whose world is melting from global warming. This is the beginning of a life-changing journey. And it's going to be at the beginning of a thrilling book for you and your middle grade kids to enjoy together. Polar Peril, a great middle grade novel by Margaret Pollock. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Happy Jack, Sad Jack, written by attorney and author Mark Bello. Jack has always been a happy little boy, but when he starts kindergarten, he discovers that he is different than others. And unfortunately, the other kids discover it too. For the very first time, Jack experiences bullying. Happy Jack suddenly becomes Sad Jack. What should Jack do? Should he tell an adult? What about his parents? Would his teacher or principal understand? What can they do to help? As parents, we want certain things for our kids. Mainly, we want them to be happy. Can today's kids celebrate their differences, or are they doomed to fight over them like generations before? Happy Jack, Sad Jack, a bullying story, is a must-read for all children and a book that your kids will never forget. Happy Jack, Sad Jack, written by Mark Bello. Join us right now from beautiful New York City. Our guest is here today to celebrate Pancakes for Roger. Please welcome to the show, Susan Combs. Hey, Susan, how are you?
Hey, Jed, how are you doing? Thanks for having me today.
I'm doing wonderful. I'm suddenly a little hungry for pancakes, I think.
It's always a good day for pancakes, isn't it?
It is. It really is. So tell us all about Pancakes for Roger, please.
Sure. So Pancakes for Roger actually is kind of a movement that started incidentally by my father. My father passed away almost 4 years ago from Agent Orange-related throat cancer, and I was one of his primary caregivers towards the end of his life. So I'm originally from a town of about 1,000 people in Missouri, so very, very different than New York City. And so my dad and I just kind of had a regiment. We were both the type A people in our family. And so I would get up at 5 a.m. I'd check on him. If he was good, I'd go to the gym, come back, check on him again. If he was good, I'd go get cleaned up. And if he was, ready to kind of get set up for the day when I got back from getting ready, then I'd help him with his tube feeding formula and get him settled in his chair for the day. And then I would just literally sit on the floor at the coffee table in my childhood home and be ready to help on a moment's notice if he needed help. But one morning, he beat me to the table. And if any of the listeners have been caregivers and have dealt with people on feeding tubes or also on oxygen, they know that the nutrition has to go in the feeding tube. And if somebody's oxygen levels get low, they can have some confusion. And so this particular morning, my dad beat me to the table and he was setting the table. So he had his placemat and he was getting his silverware. And I looked at him and I said, well, Dad, what are you doing? And he said, I want pancakes for breakfast. And I looked at him and it just broke my heart because the one simple thing that he was asking for and I couldn't give it to him. And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, Dad, there's nothing in this world that I want to give you than pancakes for breakfast, but we have a feeding tube and a DNR." And I said, if you choke, we're done here. And I don't think we're quite ready to be done. And of course he said, "Oh yes, I can." Matt said I could. And Matt is my brother and he's a nurse and he wasn't there that morning. So I knew we were dealing with some confusion from lower oxygen levels. So I said, "Let's see what we can do." So I heated up his tube feeding formula for 14 seconds on the dot, like he always liked. And I set it down on the table and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's your syrup." So a few short weeks later, he did pass away. And I took one day off work when I came back to New York. And my husband said to me, he said, "Why don't we go have some pancakes to your dad?" So that's where the kind of the movement started. My husband snapped a picture at Bel Air Diner in Queens, New York. And I relayed the story on social media and said, if you're so inclined, why don't you go have some pancakes for Roger this week? Just a reminder that our lives can change in a blink of an eye. And it's important to remember the little things in life, like just enjoying a stack of pancakes, because we don't know when those things can be taken away from us. So it kind of exploded from there. So many people started just posting pictures and, with the hashtag Pancakes to Roger, and then went on to start a movement to actually support the Veterans Clinic at the University of Missouri Law School, where my father actually went through that program. And it provides free legal services for veterans and their families navigating the VA claims and appeals process. So the month of February, his birthday was February 22nd. So the month of February, for every pancake loving picture we get on public facing profiles on social media with Pancakes to Roger hashtag, my company makes a donation to the Veterans Clinic in his honor. So that's kind of how the movement started this past February. The book came out, Pancakes to Roger, Mentorship Guide for Slaying Dragons, on his birthday, which was 2/22/22 this year, which was pretty cool. And on the fundraising efforts, we hit all 50 states, 18 countries, and just a whole lot of pancakes all over the place. And it's just been really fun to kind of see people get into it. And I even have friends now that they say their little kids always say, "Oh, we have to have pancakes to Roger. We have pancakes to Roger." They associate it with that. So it's very, very rewarding as just a child of somebody that's passed away that left such a beautiful legacy, where people say, "I can't even enjoy pancakes without just taking a moment to think about your dad," and just as a reminder to appreciate the little things in my life. So that makes me feel pretty good.
It really does. And, your dad, just from the little bit that I've heard, sounds like a really great guy. Can you tell us just a little bit more about him, and especially about the time before he became ill?
So my father, in the civilian world, he was a judge. So he had been a practicing attorney and then he was a judge. But in the military, he served our country for 39 years and 4 months in 3 branches of service. And he ultimately retired as a major general, or a 2-star general. So he was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the Army and Air National Guard. He worked out of Washington, D.C. And then he was diagnosed with Agent Orange-related throat cancer in 2008. But my dad was just one of those guys that he was good when nobody was watching. And the stories that came after he passed, and just people that had dealt with him 30 years prior when they were little kids and dealing with a custody battle with their parents, and saying how my dad made them feel safe when nobody else would. And I think just a very big testament to his life. I went to the gym the day after he passed away. And like I said, I grew up in a town of about 1,000 people, and I was walking back home 2 blocks from the gym, and I heard a clang, 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 and something just told me to look up. And I looked up, and at my, little post office, they had put the flag at half-mast for my father. So I think if you grew up in a community that appreciates your legacy and all the things that you did for the community to make that kind of statement, I think that's a sign of a life well lived, for sure.
What a beautiful story about a man who gave his life for this country, and he really did. Whether you die immediately on the battlefield or whether you die decades later from being exposed to a poison on the battlefield, your dad gave his life for this country, and he served the country for not only as in the military, but coming out in civilian life. And so it's a beautiful story of service, and I think that's these are stories that we don't talk to our kids as much as we used to. Certainly not as much as I heard these kind of stories, and the idea of serving our country was something that was really important to me. It's something that was important that I heard a lot from people growing up, and I don't think we hear it as much anymore, and I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I think in different pockets of the country. I mean, I grew up in a rural area, and I have so many friends that I've been hearing recently how their sons are enlisting or they're going through the academies or things like that. I actually I had an ROTC scholarship in college, but when I ultimately changed to a non-technical degree, the Air Force didn't want to pay for elementary education. So I imagine that, right? But it's been so great. And I have so many friends in the military and so many family members in the military. So it is something that I think that when you're in that club, it's very much a supportive club. And, we definitely show up for each other. I mean, my father's buried at Arlington, and we had over 200 people at his service, and I think 6 countries represented, and so many men that were pilots with my father in Vietnam showed up from all across the country. Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing. And they told me, they were like, Susan, we show up for each other. And they've embraced me. My father was a member of the squadron was the Purple Foxes, and they have a Facebook group, and those guys have really, kind of brought me into their fold. I mean, I've known these guys since I was a little girl. But it's just really nice to know that, hey, if I need something, I can pick up the phone and say, hey, what would my dad what do you think my dad would say about this? Or what kind of process would he go through when making this decision? And those guys can really kind of step in as those kind of chosen family members that I've collected along the way too.
Yeah. Do you think you mentioning, that idea of service, and service can take many shapes. Your dad served as a judge. You served as an elementary school teacher. That teachers are very much serving our community. Do you think that idea of service is stronger in smaller communities where we know each other more, where we know that we need to step up and help because there's no one else? If we don't do it, there's no one else going to do it.
Yeah, let me make one correction. I didn't finish elementary education. Okay. I graduated in hospitality, but I have taught on a college level. But I think that there's so many ways to do service. And for example, about a year after my father passed away, I became a hospice volunteer. Because hospice was such a beautiful supportive program for my family when my father was, when his clock was winding down. And I think that a lot of times people think of hospice as, oh God, that has to be so depressing. Oh, what a horrible place to work. But once you've gone through it and understand it fully, I don't think you feel that way. And I think you can understand the beauty of it, and being part of that process for a family is a very caring place to be and way to give a living legacy. And I mean, in terms of communities, I don't know. I mean, I have a good friend here, Russ, that his son went through West Point, mm-hmm. and he, out here in New York. And so, which shocked me. I would never thought a New York City kid that went to these hoity-toity schools would end up at West Point. But he's a kid he's blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid that speaks fluent Arabic. And he's gone through special forces training and things like that, Ranger training, and it's amazing. And that's a kid here in New York City. But I think when somebody's been touched and impacted in a certain way, I think you are compelled to take action to give service of yourself. And I think that, especially when you're going through something like grief or loss, it can be the most healing thing for you. I mean, just like with the hospice work, or even on social media, when I see somebody share that they've lost a parent or lost a sibling or a loved one, I mean, I'm the first one to reach out privately to a person, because I don't need it to be a billboard and write something on their wall as 300 and some people did. I think it's more impactful to do it. And I think that I always talk about being a member of the club, and I feel like I've always been a sympathetic person. But for me, it's very hard to be empathetic until you've been in those shoes. And I think with a significant loss, it is kind of hard to really, truly understand. I think when somebody would say, oh, I lost my father, and before you're in the club, you're like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. And you don't know what to say. I mean, in my family, we say you feel like the ugly third grader, where you just feel kind of awkward and don't know what to do. But I think once you've been through that, then you know the importance of people reaching out, and not just in the first week. It's 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, 9 months down the road, the second year, which I believe is the hardest year. So I think that those are ways that people can do service. They don't have to do organized. Just be a good person and do the right thing.
Yeah. So how can we use Pancakes for Roger, a mentorship guide for slaying dragons, in our families with our kids?
Sure. So I've actually had a lot of military guys that have come to me and said, I'm going to use this as a guide to raise strong kids, raise a strong daughter. And that just fills my soul so much. So the book is divided into 4 different sections. So self, love, family, and career. So that's kind of like the 4 pillars of your adult life, I think, for the most part. And a lot of them are lessons that I learned from my father, but also some other mentors along the way. The language, for the most part, is pretty clean. There's a few cuss words along the way, but I've actually had friends that have reached out and said, my 10-year-old son read this book, which kind of surprised me. But it's just, I think there's just some good kind of meat and potatoes type of lessons. Like one of the lessons that I think is one of the biggest ones for me is it's important for you to be understood, but more important for you not to be misunderstood. And I think as kids, especially when we're writing papers for school and things like that, we want to use these big words because we want to feel like we're smart. But a lot of times, if somebody has to Google what you're saying, then you've missed the opportunity to get a point across. So those are things that, like my aunt used to say, don't use a $10 word when you can use a nickel one. You don't have to worry about like people thinking you're putting on airs and trying to be a little bit too big for your britches. And things just like, drive the car. That's a big lesson in the book that, if you grew up in a farming community like I did, you're usually driving at a much younger age than most city kids. So, you're driving at, 10, 12 years old, sometimes younger. I mean, I learned how to parallel park between a feed truck and a horse trailer. And, but when it came to highway driving, my dad always had a cadence of drive the car, drive the car, drive the car. And so he could say, you could be the best driver in the world, but you have to be worried about the things around you and anticipate those worst case scenarios. So he'd literally grab the steering wheel and jerk it. So we'd go off the road and we just had to keep our composure and remember to drive the car, drive the car. And it's become a cadence that my brothers and I were kind of brainwashed with, but it ends up becoming a metaphor for life because anytime there seems to be a task I have to tackle and I walk into the room and I'm like, oh my God, how the hell am I going to get through this? It's just like, breaking it down in bite-sized nuggets and saying, okay, let's do first things first, make it simple. And then you're just start with step 1, then step 2, then step 3, and then you'll eventually get it done. So I think sometimes we can just get so much in our heads instead of saying, stop, let me do first things first, and then it'll all seem to work out.
I think that's a really important lesson for everyone, but especially if it's something that we can teach our kids at a young age. It's you're presented with a problem, and before you freak out, before you stress out, before you just melt into a puddle of anxiety, take a breath and decide what it is we need to do first. What's that first step? Okay, then and that's all we'll worry about right now, and we take care of that first step, and then what's next, and then what's next, and because that's all we can deal with. We can't deal with that huge mountain, but we can take that first step up the mountain and eventually conquer it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned there are a couple of cuss words in the book. That certainly is nothing that would cause me not to read a book with my kid or prevent me, from me preventing my kid from reading a book. I've been around lots of 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds, and they're using lots of language, and they're certainly hearing it in the media. So, and I think I think that's another lesson that we can teach our kids is that words are sounds that are coming out of our mouth, and what's more important is the intention behind them, and try to get the meaning of what this person is trying to say to you, and what's the story.
Well, and I think with my godsons, I mean, in New York City, if your kids are on the subway, they're going to hear it. It's inevitable. And so one of my best friends, Carlene, she's actually a judge in the city, and she has 2 boys that are my godsons. And she says there's adult words and there's kid words. Mm-hmm. When you transition to being adult, you can use those adult words too. And I think with the book, I mean, it's easy to pick up and put down. I mean, if adult was going to read it straight through, it takes you about 3.5 hours, but it's written in kind of a vignette type of way. So there might be a chapter that's just a page or a few paragraphs. And so what I've seen a lot of times when people people are using this with their kids, they'll read through one lesson and then they'll kind of talk about the lesson. And there are going to be some lessons that probably are going to be more for, like the teenagers, the sections on love and things like that, where it's talking about, my mother-in-law always says every trash can has a lid, meaning that there's somebody for everybody. But I think it's also good, for like 15 and 16-year-olds, especially girls. I think a lot of times on social media, you can see all these things and you can say, oh, my life should be this Hallmark movie and this torrid love affair and things like that. And it's just talking about being more practical and finding a partner because I really feel that the partner that you choose in this life can make you better or worse every single day. And so I think it's kind of good. I tell my little cousins that they're not allowed to get married before 26 or 27 because I feel like the maturity level is just, you need to kind of be off your parents' payroll, before you take the next step into your own type of thing.
Yeah. Great stuff. And again, having these conversations around a book, it's so much easier to, read a lesson, read one chapter and then talk about it, because we're not sitting down and having, quote unquote, the talk with our kids about X or Y. We're just talking about this book. And wow, if we happen to learn something along the way, that's even better.
Yeah. Well, and each section at the end it's called the syrup. And so it has kind of the key takeaways, from the book. So it's kind of good to review, or if somebody's using this book, I've had some people that have reached out and they're using it as a book club. Those kind of give some good kind of tidbits that you can formulate some questions around and lead into different conversations.
Yeah. What is your favorite lesson that your dad taught you that you shared in the book?
The important for you to be understood and more important for you not to be misunderstood would be probably a big one. But I think one of the biggest ones, I graduated college in 2001, and that was an excellent job market, pre-9/11 to graduate in. And I had 8 job offers out here on the East Coast. And so my dad came out here with me and we drove to New York City and to places in Connecticut and Boston and things like that. And looked at the different properties. And my dad was talking about the different aspects of your life. And he always says there's kind of 3 facets of your life. There's the place that you live, the person that you're with, and the thing that you do for a living. And he always said, if you can be happy with 3 out of the 3, you're living a golden life. Even if you're happy with 2 out of the 3, you're still doing pretty good. But he said, if you're happy with 1 or none, only you are the one that can get off your butt and do something about it. So those were things that I've just always kept in mind, that, okay, if I seem unhappy on a certain day, I kind of run through that and be like, okay, am I not in love with New York City right now? I'll tell you, I'm not very in love with New York City in the summer months, so that's for sure. And so maybe, I was joking with somebody today. I said, I think I need to get a summer home in the North Pole because this is the 4th heat wave in New York City we've had this summer and I'm over it. But, so it's just like, if you live in a place that has some culture and cultivates the things that you enjoy doing, if you're an outdoor person and you live in Colorado, you're probably going to be a heck of a lot more happy than if you're like in a metropolitan area where you can't see rivers and mountains and things that make you so happy. And then the person that you're with, I think that a lot of times, people settle in their relationships because I think that they truly don't know what a good relationship is. And either they didn't have one modeled for them, which quite possibly, or they just don't realize how good something can be. And so they kind of settle until they figure out, you know what, I'm just not happy. So I always tell people all the time, if you're crying 3 months into the relationship, you should run, not walk out the door, because it's not going to get better. And then you have the thing that you do for a living. So I think there's a huge difference between a job and a career. And I think there's nothing wrong with either of them, but you have to understand what you're up against. So I always say with a job, you're just kind of checking the box to get the paycheck and, until you move on to check another box. But a career you're willing to make sacrifices for, and you're willing to do without, maybe go without vacation if you want to start a company and you're passionate about it and because you believe in it. And, I think that careers are really where people can thrive. So, it's kind of talking about those different things that I was very fortunate enough to learn throughout my life with the parents that I had. And I know that not everybody has parents like I did. And so that's one of the things I talk about in the book early on is, I know family can be a very big hot button. I mean, you have the people that adore their family. You have the people that do a geographic and move across the country from their family. You have people that find out more. I'll tell you, like, I think my generation, people are finding out a lot more about secret families that they didn't realize. And then you have the people that don't have any family, and so they make a chosen family. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I have a fantastic chosen family here in New York because I don't have any blood family outside of one cousin that lives here. Mm-hmm. So I think that those are very important to kind of build those tribes and build those communities around you, because it's like an insurance policy. You need them in place before you need them.
Yeah. Dig that well before you're thirsty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, it's almost lunchtime for me here. I eat early. What was your dad's favorite pancake topping?
My dad was a purist. I mean, my grandparents were dairy farmers. So I'll tell you that the one thing my dad always had with pancakes, and I think we just did as kids too, and I still do it, is we always had milk. We always had a glass of milk with our pancakes to get it down. But my dad wasn't fancy. I mean, it was like, he didn't care about the blueberries and the chocolate chips or anything like that. Just butter and maple syrup, and you're pretty much good to go.
All right. Well, that's going to be the lunch for me today.
There you go.
Susan, tell everybody where they can go to find out more, not only about the book, but also about the movement.
Yeah, so they can just go onto the website, www.pancakesroger.com, and it gives the backstory about Pancakes Roger, how it got started. You'll see we have the pancake map from our past February pancake campaign, so that will just be kind of ongoing, and you can see the social media posts from a lot of people. We run contests in February, so like the most patriotic, the most full spirit, the best overall pancake, and it's a lot of fun getting people involved that way. This past year we got more creative because we had some people that were like, oh, I just can't do pancakes. I don't do carbs. And I'm like, well, what about a kimchi pancake? What about a seafood pancake? So you had a lot of people that were doing, potato latkes, in Jewish communities, and doing potato pancakes, and just waffles or pancakes with abs. So we chalked that up as pancakes as well. But the website's a lot of fun to just kind of get some of the lessons and learn a little bit more about the book. And then the book can be purchased on Amazon directly as well.
We've had a really fun time and a really informative time speaking to the author of Pancakes for Roger, Susan Combs. Hey, Susan, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Jen. I appreciate it.
Please join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Catherine Holmes. She'll be celebrating the release of her brand new chapter book, Class Critters, Madison Morris is Not a Mouse. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, if you are the author of a fantastic children's book, you may be delighted that your book is out there in the world, but you may be really frustrated that no one knows about it. Or maybe your family and friends know about it, but that's about it. Well, we can help you celebrate your book to the world. So many ways we can help you let the world know about your book. You can be a guest here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's fun. It's easy. It doesn't cost a thing, and it gives you the chance in a long-form conversation to tell the world all about your book, all about yourself, your inspiration, your brand. It's really fantastic. You can also submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel, and if they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. And we can tell you all about our monthly promotion program. We are so excited about this program. We can celebrate your book with commercials on the podcast, messages to our 100,000 plus social media followers, display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards, and have your book on display at whatever live event we'll be participating in that given month. In September 2022, we'll be at the PTO Today Expo in St. Louis, Missouri. In October, we'll be at the Orange County Children's Book Festival out in California. Learn all about these opportunities by going to readingwithyourkids.com, clicking on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page, scrolling on down. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Susan Combs. Please be sure to check out Pancakes for Roger. Also want to thank our sponsors, Mark Bello, author of Happy Jack, Sad Jack, and also Margaret Pollock, the author of the great middle grade adventure, Peril. I want to thank my fantastic team, Fatima Khan, Lori Brady, Nicole Bell Castro, Mirabella Q, Rain Penn. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.